Well, good. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. My name is Jennifer Ives, and I'm with Arlington Economic Development. David Miller is my partner in crime for VentureCamp. This was really his idea last summer, and I remember he called me and said, you know, we should host something for entrepreneurs in the summertime. Maybe attract some students here who are visiting the DC region, working over the summer, and kind of talk to students about entrepreneurship. And 3 conversations last summer that attracted over 650 entrepreneurs, from students and then all the way up to other ages as well. We hosted it again in the fall, and we hosted it again in the springtime, and now we've touched well over 1,200 entrepreneurs during the conversations. And so welcome tonight. We're really very pleased to have you here tonight. We have a very interesting conversation tonight around women in entrepreneurship. A lot of Twitter conversation around tonight's conversation, especially with a dude on the panel. We try. But Paul Singh had some really interesting.
I can't take the aggressive stance.
So there was some conversation about that on the panel, but I think when Paul starts sharing his story, after our female entrepreneurs and founders share their stories, I think you'll understand why David and I thought it would be really interesting to invite Paul to be part of the conversation. So at that, I'm going to hand the conversation and the mic over to Dana Taylor. Dana is the president and CEO of Intelligent Ethos, and I couldn't think of anyone better, more accomplished, and more brilliant to host tonight and to moderate tonight. Not only is she a female founder of a company, but she's also amazing, and she's going to ask some great questions. So at that, I'm going to hand over the mic. Please feel free to tweet, although sometimes Paul gives the disclaimer, do not tweet this, so you might hear that tonight, I don't know. But everyone's Twitter handles are up on the screen. We use the hashtag VentureCamp, and with that, enjoy.
Thank you, Jennifer. A lot of pressure, a lot of compliments to live up to, so I'll work on that. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here tonight. We are excited about this conversation. We have an amazing panel, and before we get started, we're going to have everyone tell you who they are and what their business is. And if you could also share maybe something personal about yourself that is related to your day-to-day decision-making in running a business, and it's not all just your business, so please share a little bit about yourself as well.
My name is Dr. Amy Schiffman. I am a board-certified emergency physician. About 2.5 years ago, I broke off from emergency medicine in a slow but not so painful way and started a house calls practice out of Bethesda, Maryland, but serving all of metropolitan Washington, D.C., taking care of primarily frail elderly folks in their home.
And something personal?
I am a mother. And part of the reason that I ended up making some of my decisions, although it doesn't totally drive everything, is because the practice of medicine that I had at that time was not entirely jiving with parenting in every way that I had envisioned. So that was one of the reasons that I moved to what I'm doing.
And I am Beth Johnson. I'm president and founder of an advertising and digital marketing agency called RP3 Agency. We're located in Bethesda. I actually started the company after working in that industry for many years for someone else and helping someone else grow his company, and decided to go out on my own 4 years ago. Something personal about myself, I feel like it's true confessions. I make a lot of decisions at 2 in the morning, and I feel like I have stopped sleeping since I founded my company.
Hi, I'm Brooke Salkoff. I'm co-founder and CEO of Camp Easy, and Camp Easy is Airbnb for the $25 billion camp market. So I really have to take my hat off to Jennifer and David for calling this VentureCamp. I try to drop camp in as many sentences as possible.
As you should.
So we connect the buyers and the sellers in the camp market. So if you're a parent looking for your camp options in out of school time, especially for working parents, which is 80% of families out there, they hit summertime and the kids are out of school, but they still have to show up for work. And that was our situation at home when we were both working full-time and needing to find camp options for our 2 kids. And realized that in solving this problem for parents, we were solving an even bigger problem, a marketing problem on the part of 60,000 camps in the United States that need a marketing channel that actually works, a digital marketing channel too, since they're often showing up at camp fairs and shopping centers on the weekends and trying to figure out how they're going to reach their target audience. So something personal about me, I was in the news business for 17 years. So I was a reporter and an anchor, and I was on NBC for 11 years here and across the country. And that informs my everyday's decisions about how to present Camp Easy to my audience and how to make sure that my messaging strategy conforms with how the audience I want to reach and how I want to reach them.
Hi, my name is Ruta Adas, and my business is to study those in business. So I'm the researcher, the token researcher on this panel, and I'll be talking about some of the research I do. I've been doing research on entrepreneurship for over 15 years, looking more at the policy perspective, the international perspective. I love studying entrepreneurs. I think that they're the real magicians because they create something out of, something new and wonderful out of everyday things that we didn't see before. So I'm affiliated with George Mason, but something personal is I was an academic, and now I've taken sort of the leap into working more with the private sector, wanting to have my research have a greater impact. So it was a bit daunting at first, but it's very exciting.
Cool. I'm Paul Singh. I'm a guy. I fill the quota here. I'll just start backwards. So the thing about me is, so I'm a Mason alum, although the irony is I barely made it through school, and I basically went 6 years through and failed almost every other quarter. So total irony here. The other, I think, really interesting point that I'm going to make just real quick before I tell you about myself, it's so funny to just notice, like, when you look out from this angle, everybody's like spread out, very much like college. It's almost like you guys don't like each other, and you don't want to talk to each other. You networked out there. You guys were doing a killer job out there, but in here, you're like, stay the fuck away from me. I don't want to, like, be involved. Anyway, yeah, F-bomb counter, if anybody's got it. I'm your guy. Again, my name's Paul Singh. My last and first real job was at America Online 15 years ago. And then since then, I kind of tripped and stumbled forward. So I started a hosting company, somehow managed to sell it a few years later. Failed a lot from like 2004 to 2008. I was really good at losing money, really good. And then 2008 started another company. We were doing lead generation for blue collar people, sold that in 2009. Started writing some software to kind of predict the private markets.
And ironically, women's issues. And so that's something that I've been able to bring into my company. And so I think the pros are, just that control of the vision and making the decisions that are right. The cons are making the decisions that are wrong and not having anyone, there, to blame. And also, I think I was sharing this with Brooke earlier that, I would say in a business like mine where, the biggest investment is human capital. So it's bringing people and on board and they're buying into a vision that is yours. I take that responsibility very seriously. Those people's lives are in my hands, and I have to make good decisions for them and their families, their career paths, their futures. And so that sometimes is, I think, part of the burden that keeps me up at night. So that's been fun.
Okay. So Amy, your story is very different. You've spent years in school and years working in hospitals. What about your job and expectations of you before becoming an entrepreneur did you find to be unacceptable? And in what ways is your work at Capitol House Calls different?
Well, I guess I have to go back to this idea that when you're in college and you think to yourself, oh, what am I going to be when I grow up? Not every path is totally clear. But once you make that career choice and you head into medical school, it's almost like a red carpet sort of rolls out in front of you. And as long as you stay on that carpet, you're going to be fine. It doesn't have to be red. It can be any color. But that carpet is a very straight and narrow path. And the way that you go into medical school is not necessarily the way that you come out of medical school. And the choices that you make about which direction you're going to go are pretty set in stone, because you're not going to see many radiologists flipping around to become a neurosurgeon. I mean, we all went to 4 years of medical school, but at that point, when you decide to go to residency, you've made some serious choices. So then you say, oh, all right, well, here I am. I've decided to go to do 4 years of emergency medicine training. You go through that, and you don't really understand exactly what's at the other end. You perceive that there's something at the other end. I mean, you meet people all the time who are thinking, oh, you got to do emergency medicine. It fits so well with the kind of medicine you like to practice, or your personality, or this, that, or the next thing. That's sort of how that filtering process works in medical school. And then when you get out the other end, you sort of are like, huh, so this is it, huh? This is it. Okay, well, I'm going to spend 12 hours 3 times a week in the emergency department, which, by the way, is an amazing place to work. You do a lot of wonderful things for people. It is over time, and don't tweet this.
I have started a trend.
Over time, it becomes less, academically challenging and more physically challenging in some ways. It's long hours, it's overnights, it's 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. and you have no control of your schedule. So there's a lot of lifestyle issues that sort of evolve as you go into medicine. I mean, if you go into other types of medicine, a neurosurgeon's life is very predictable. You have a couple of days of clinic, and then the rest of the time you get to operate, which is all that you really want to do. An obstetrician, you're signing up for a life of hell. My husband is an OB. So basically, you kind of know what you're going to do, but there's a few of us who I think got through it all and were like, wait a minute, I am now only ever going to work for someone else. There is not a single emergency physician I've ever met that has ever hung a shingle. Like, I think I'm going to start my own hospital and have my own emergency room. You can't do that in emergency medicine. And as it turns out, I must have that bug, that entrepreneurial bug. I mean, over the years, I always found myself trying to do things outside of the exact path that I was doing. And so I kind of just happened upon the idea that I might be an entrepreneur. So, the issue really is that I took a path that I thought was going to be the straight and narrow, and that I thought I would get to the other end and say, I'm an ER doctor for life. But as it turns out, I got there and I thought, well, I don't really want to work for somebody else. I want to do something else that's creative, because emergency medicine and medicine in general kind of beats the creativity out of you a little bit. It really does. I mean, it doesn't mean to, but I mean, unless everybody practiced medicine completely differently and was so creative in their ideas, I mean, we would not have a standard way of practicing medicine in this country. So I sort of capitalized a little bit on that creative spirit, and I decided I would sort of branch out and do something that was mine, that would be something that would fit with my lifestyle choices, that would fit with what I wanted to have happen, in the future, in 10 years. What do I want to be doing? Where do I want to be? I mean, I realized my background in, let's say, computer programming, or my interest in mobile medicine, or my interest in all this, it all can kind of come together in one place. And so when I got to the other end of emergency medicine, I said, I think I'm going to try something different.
Excellent, excellent. So Ruta, you've done research on women, high potential female entrepreneurs. And what do you find, what does your research say about why women start their own businesses?
I guess, so my research is more looking at a global perspective, and recently Dell came forward and has been a very generous sponsor to come out with, and we came out with the first Gender JEDI Index. JEDI stands for Global Entrepreneurship and Development Index, and it's a great acronym too, right? And we had, in our pilot sample, we had 17 countries, both developed and developing countries, and I think my starting question is not so much why, it is why not? Because I think we have great examples here of really successful female entrepreneurs, but when we look at, especially the ratios, startup ratios, male to female, they're lower in most countries, almost in all countries, I'd say, they're lower. And then when we look at those who are looking to scale their businesses, they're lower. And when we look in the high-tech sector, it's very low. Even in high-tech hubs like Silicon Valley, 10% of startups in the high-tech sector are female. And so my starting point is, why is that? And I don't think it has to do with anything genetic or inborn. I think it has to do with the context and the incentive structures in that context. That's what I've learned through my years of research, is that incentives really matter for entrepreneurs. You have entrepreneurs in all different, all over the world in all different contexts, but it's going to be the incentive structures that are going to have indicate who is actually going to become an entrepreneur, who's going to start that up. So for example, we want entrepreneurs that are going to be enhancing our economic system, growing productivity, but we have excellent entrepreneurs in Colombia and so forth who are drug cartels. But that's not who we want to be.
I would invest in that.
Right, but that's not, so it's also, we're trying to, we're looking at, so high potential, why high potential? High potential has the greatest impact for economic growth, productivity, and competitiveness of a country, and that's what we're looking for in the future in terms of creating jobs and creating new products and services. So I don't know if you want me to continue, want me to stop about the research a little bit.
Well, so one of the next things I was going to talk about is goal setting. And we talk about the definition of success, why, how do women set that definition of success? So maybe you can talk a little bit more about the study and those parameters. What is the definition of success for women in that high potential group that you're looking at?
Right, so we define the high potential in terms of businesses that are export-oriented, that are market expanding, that are also growth-oriented and innovative. So these are sort of the parameters that we're looking at, because that tends to go with businesses that are going to have the largest impact. And maybe if I could just give a visual, I think that may be useful. Oops, did I go backwards? There we go. So this just gives you a visual of the ranking. So we're the first index that actually brought together different countries and ranked them in terms of the favorability of that country for female entrepreneurship development and high potential female entrepreneurship. And in that we see the United States ranked the highest of the 17 countries included. We had some surprises. The UK ranked quite low. Japan ranked very low in terms of, the thing is when you look at the context, people understand it. When they put it in the ranking, they're like, oh my gosh, that low. And so that's a great thing about data. It's powerful. And especially ranking in an index, it really does provide the momentum for bringing about that change and asking those important questions on how to bring about positive change.
Excellent, thank you.
I think, by the way, I'll just make a comment on this. Don't tweet numbers. Don't even tweet anything I say for the next 30 seconds. Seriously, SEC will hate me. But one thing I think it's interesting is that, please don't tweet this. I'll get in trouble, seriously. $700 million of our returns have come from a woman founder from India and a woman founder from New Zealand. Weird. Like, you can't predict it. It's so interesting to think about. Like, it's so hard to predict. Because I think this suggests that, tell me if I'm wrong, by the way. I think this suggests that, from an investor standpoint, I should just go index the top 5. I think what this suggests is if I invest in every woman founder, technically, in these top 5 countries, I would win. But with our 3 years of fund data, we haven't had any, I don't think we've had any big wins from those 5. It's still early, but it's interesting. It's so lumpy, right? That's the. But from a pure venture standpoint, it's an exit. Wait, what? I missed a joke there, but yeah. But from a venture standpoint, it is an exit. Yeah.
Right, but I think you're bringing up a good point, Paul. But this isn't so much a tool for investors.
Got it. Okay.
It's a tool for policymakers.
Fair enough. That's cool.
And for programs. And so I think what you're saying, and is probably true, is emerging markets have a lot of
we gotta find out what they're laughing about.
potential.
Is this pirated? Probably a dude did it.
That's so awesome. Okay, well, let's get back to our panel discussion. So I want to spend some more time on this definition of success, and I want to talk with Brooke, because let's talk about your business and what were your expectations? What was your definition of success when you first started your business, and then as you look from this point forward, how will you define success moving ahead? So when you started, what was the definition? What's the definition now?
Right. Well, maybe I didn't set the bar super high when I first started. I mean, I think my husband and I both thought that the definition of success when we first started was not really in any sort of quantitative way. At that point, we weren't trying to raise any capital, so we weren't thinking in terms of, we have to be a $100 million a year company in 5 years. We were thinking, can we fill this need in a meaningful way and continue to grow in a meaningful way? So we're connecting buyers and sellers in this market, and we continue to grow. So I think my definition of success when we first started was a continual upward trajectory in terms of making those connections. Not in any quantitative way, just continued expansion.
Excellent. Beth?
I would say that my definition of success was both qualitative and quantitative. So qualitatively, I had mentioned, I wanted to build a company that I wanted to go to work every day and work with people that I admire and who shared my passion and my vision. And so that part of it was, I would say that's a real driver for me. But I also wanted to be profitable, and I think because I've seen other businesses decline, and I was a part of one, that agency I mentioned had some years of decline, I learned some things, what not to do. And so I really, for me, success was bottom line oriented as well. And we honestly were profitable the first year and have been profitable ever since. And I've managed the business to profit. And I think we've been able to accomplish both those things.
So is that your goal looking forward, is to continue to be profitable, or do you have other tangible goals that you're...
Oh, I have big goals.
She sounds like a planner.
I think,
Seems like a planner.
Yes.
yes.
Do you have a business plan, actually?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Did you guys actually write
Of course
one?
I have a business plan.
Wait, do you guys have a business plan? Wow.
That's an excellent question.
None of our companies do. Don't tweet that either. Seriously, none of them do.
I mean, I'll go back to Paul on that one, because my question for you, Paul, is going to be, when a business comes to you, is their end game, their ultimate goal, something that you're looking at? Do you look at business plans now that you brought that up, or do you care? What do these numbers and these goals matter from an investor standpoint?
First of all, in terms of a disclaimer, I should just say that we're probably one of the newest VCs out there, and it's not yet clear what's going to happen. Now, I think our LPs are happy, but we'll see what happens. The second thing I'll just say is that, does everybody know the difference between an angel investor and a VC? Yes, okay, good. So just to be clear, an angel, technically, you've probably heard all sorts of phrases, super angel, micro VC, whatever. The fact is that the way that we generally define it is an angel is investing his or her own money, and a VC is investing somebody else's. And why that's different is that when you're investing somebody else's, the SEC steps in, the Securities and Exchange Commission of the US steps in and says, we're going to regulate this, we're going to audit you, we're going to do everything. Now, the reason why that's important for you to understand is when you're an angel, you can invest for any reason you want, right? So if I invest in you as an angel, nobody cares. I can invest because I like you. I can invest because I think you're going to make money. I can invest because the sky's blue. The government doesn't care. When it comes to the VC, though, the exit absolutely matters. Now, if we just take that one step further, from the pure VC side, I'll tell you that you need to understand that venture economics play a far bigger role in any decision you ever get from a VC than most people realize, right? And so, in other words, if you look at the data, there aren't very many billion-dollar exits anymore, right? I mean, you could probably count on one hand, maybe two, the number that have happened in the tech industry in the last year, maybe 2 years, right? And the reason why everybody's looking for the billion-dollar exit is because they're sitting on top of hundreds of millions of dollars, and somehow they've got to pump in 50 million or 100 million into somebody's company and hope that it'll turn into $1 billion. It's a problem, and one of the things that we do at 500 is we're not necessarily, don't get me wrong, I'd love, big 100 million, billion, whatever, trillion-dollar exit, but the fact is, we start super early, and we're okay, generally speaking, with a $50 million exit, or a 20, or 100, and it's not because we're nice people, it's because we worry about the venture economics, we're thinking about it. If you ever want to learn about this, by the way, it's super easy. Basically, it's going to be really funny, or true, probably going to piss off some people, but anyway, if you're a chimp with a checkbook, you can probably make money. Seriously, if you're just somebody that invests, it's so easy. Venture capital is so easy. It's ridiculous. But the point is simply, if you go to venturehacks.com, It's not a site that I own or anything like that, but it's actually where I learned a lot of stuff about venture. And look at the archives and just read it. Super easy. And if you just skim through it, I guarantee you're going to start to connect the dots and start to figure out why VCs are looking for that billion-dollar exit. It's not always right. So that'll lead me to the final point I'll make, which is the thing is that entrepreneurs look at VC as if it's a mark of honor, right? As if like raising money from a VC is like the end state and the goal that you want. In reality, it's not. Most profitable businesses are not venture investable anyway.
So I want to talk about that. So for my company, Intelligent Ethos has been in business for 3 years. And I'm in rooms with women, business owners a lot. And there are philosophies about whether or not we want to take venture capital, you know, whether we want to self-fund, whether we want 100% ownership of our companies. And every woman seems to have a strong opinion about it. So I'll ask my panelists, you know, what is your philosophy about taking venture capital? You know, do you want to take it? Do you want to grow your company? What are you thinking as it relates to funding for your company? And I will start with you, Amy.
Well, I'll tell you where my company started, and then I'll tell you how I think it will probably evolve. So when I started my practice, my non-emergency medicine practice, it started out of my own pocket. And it continued to start out of my own pocket, and out of my own pocket, and out of my own pocket, because I was inventing something that honestly nobody else that I could find had really done in this geographical area. And so I had a lot of learning to do. It wasn't just that I was going to open a Dunkin' Donuts. It wasn't like I was going to do something totally cookie cutter that had already been done and I just wanted to do it for my own self. I mean, I had to learn about a million different things. I had to learn a new kind of medicine. I became very spirited and philosophical about how I envisioned medicine being throughout the whole country. You know, the whole world should now understand what it means to grow old, and how everybody should be aware of, you know, not retirement living, but post-retirement living. And it became this whole new philosophy that I really ascribe to. So I changed so much as I began to learn with my own money, you know, all about this new business. At the same time as thinking, oh my God, I need malpractice insurance, I need garbage cans, I need to buy some new iPads, I need to buy more iPads, I'm buying more iPads. So I just kept buying stuff, realizing that it just kept going and going, and oh my God, I didn't even know they made that, and I bought some mobile blood machines, and then I bought, you know, so it just kept going and going until finally my husband looked at me and he goes, are we done? Are you going to make this thing sort of work? You know, you've got all this stuff. I had stuff, and I didn't have an office. It was really out of my own house. So then, as the business sort of grew, and I, you know, the joke is that I had to start somewhere. So I went and I found this one home health agency, and I said, hi, here's some bagels. I'd like to start seeing some patients in their homes. And they said, really? Here's 20 patients. And I was like, whoa, okay, hold on. That was way more than I thought. Dangerous success story here, which is being overwhelmed on day one. And it just sort of has grown and grown and grown until it's self-sustaining. But then you say, well, in order to make this work well, when every time I go see a patient, I create 3 hours of administrative time, because actually in this country, for every physician FTE, there are 5 other FTEs that they create. So every 1 hour of a physician's work creates 5 hours of somebody else's work.
Job creation, I guess.
There you go. If there was money to pay for it. Right. So I mean, I'm a purely Medicare-based practice. I mean, I have some private pay patients, but all in all, this is pretty much Medicare. And so you grow and you grow and you grow until you really have kind of outgrown your seams, and then you start looking for more money. Now, naive as I was, I said, oh, I gotta get a venture capitalist. I gotta get somebody to give me some money, you know, because I get more secretaries, more iPads, and I get more iPads. I get more iPads, and iPads.
That's what we want.
I know. So, you know, I just kept wanting more iPads. So I kept looking around, and finally I said, you know what, I'm gonna have to move this in a direction where I'm realistic about what it is that I need to do in order to grow this, to now fulfill this new philosophy that I've ascribed to, which is that everybody should be getting house calls, that Medicare lets get house calls, don't tweet that, and you know, all of these different things. So I actually initially looked to some banks for some personal loans. And they said, well, oh, okay, so how much is your house worth? And they started wanting something from me. in order to give me money. And I did not understand what venture capital was. And the naivete of physicians is there's a certain number of physicians that will say, oh, I'm going to go and get my, MBA from Johns Hopkins Knight Computer School and learn how to do all of that. And then there's some people who say, I'm going to try network. And I tried a little bit of different things, but I finally said, in order for me to keep my vision the way I want to keep it, for right now, I'm going to do this. Now, as I've gotten into this, I realize there's a lot of spin-off concepts that I've identified that are real needs out there, and I think those are the types of ideas that would be more, suited for a VC type of experience. An early idea, it's more of a technology idea, and then you just sort of start it up and you present it, and you hopefully someone gives you $10 million to do that. But I don't really actually understand that process as well as I probably could. I understand what's in my own checking account, how to get a loan, and then you look to VCs when you have this great crackerjack idea that you think is going to go big.
I see Brooke grabbing a mic. She's got something to say.
Well, just, definitely some experience on the whole fundraising subject. And I think anybody who starts their own business, like Paul said, thinks that raising money is the end-all, be-all, and that you've arrived if you raise money. Well, really, that's just the beginning of a relationship that's sort of like a marriage outside your marriage, maybe with multiple other people.
Actually, it's probably easier to get divorced from your real spouse than to get rid of your investor. That's, for real.
That is true.
I do think that there is a debate. I mean, it's a whole rabbit hole online that you could just investigate for hours if you want to get into raising money versus bootstrapping, and really it's never been an either-or question. It's not an either-or question. I mean, it is true that once you raise the money, there's no going back.
But what's been your experience, Brooke? What has been your experience as it relates to raising money or bootstrapping?
Well, so we did raise some money. I sold 6% of the company in spring of 2011, and it was hard to get there. At that point, we'd had a lot of success. At that point, we went from concept to revenue in 6 months. Before we even launched, we got revenue, we got customers. So, we had a pretty good success story, and we have 120 customers in 18 states in Canada. Camps are the ones who pay us, and we try to acquire users for free. Users use us for free. So there was a lot of reason to be optimistic about the trajectory of Camp Easy. From an investor standpoint, and Paul can get into this more, investors really like entrepreneurs who've had prior exits, who have experience being on teams before that have been part of, some success, exits, or, they've been acquired, or they go through a public offering. So that's the one thing I would say that most women out there have not been a part of those teams. And I think that's one reason that you don't see a lot of women actually go on to raise money, is that they typically, this is obviously broad brush, haven't had that prior. The crazy part about it is that you could really have ridden somebody's coattails as part of some other team that's gone on to success. But because you've been even tangentially related to that team, you're associated with it, and a new investor who looks at you and your new business idea might give you credit and give you money for having been a part of that success. But there are a lot of women out there who have not been a part of that prior exit or some business success. So we raised the money, but honestly, I'm glad it wasn't more than that. I'm glad I don't have to answer to investors, on a more regular basis than I do now, because it's a huge time commitment. Because to do all of the reporting that is required back to your investors is a responsibility. They're entitled to that information. They gave you money for part of your company, for the opportunity. So it just becomes another part of your job if you take on that money. So my advice to people is to bootstrap, and even once you have bootstrapped as much as you possibly can, bootstrap more. Because what's interesting is that the more traction you make, the more you might find that people want to work for you and your idea for less than you paid people who came on earlier, because you've gotten farther and they see the momentum, and then you're like, wait, you just want to come on to help, and they're willing to come on to help, even for not much money. So I would just say, don't underestimate your own powers of charm and charisma and persuasion in sort of starting that momentum and getting that core team together for not much money.
Ruta, in your research, what are you seeing as it relates to women and their desire and drive to scale their companies and grow? And then how does that relate to them receiving external financing?
Fortunately, I don't have a very clear answer for this, and this is a real problem when we look from the research point of view, is that there's very little data on this, and even the data are just sort of, they're estimates. So in the United States, it's like 2 to 5% of female entrepreneurs have VC funding. It's an estimate. And in other countries, we don't even have an estimate. So it's very difficult. It's a big black hole. And so one of our outcomes of our research are these really glaring gaps where we really do need better data so we can have a better idea of what kind of financing women are accessing and to what extent they are, and compare that across countries. I mean, some of the data that we have, which is sobering, and what's really cool about having Paul here is he's taken a different approach, is when you look at the top managers in VC companies of the data we have in countries, it's very male dominated. And I think diversity really does breed success for the VCs, but also for entrepreneurs. And when you see that's often an additional barrier to getting the VC funding.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at least 20% of our founders are women, or at least, we have a lot of women in our portfolio. And I know that my mom was entrepreneurial, Dave's mom was entrepreneurial, but still that doesn't really qualify us to, for example, like one of the verticals that we started to pay attention to is something we call family tech. And family tech is anything to do with like games, education, healthcare, especially with where kids are involved. And like that's something that, as sexist as it sounds, I don't mean it this way, I don't quite know how to value those. And sometimes I think Christine and some of our other investing team members that actually have kids and or are women are way more qualified to kind of assess. And so I think actually what's interesting is one of the big gaps in venture capital is people that are missing, so VCs I think, and angels that are not paying attention to women founders are missing out on a huge opportunity. But I say that carefully because like one of the things I get nervous about is I think it's still kind of awkward for me to kind of acknowledge, I don't deny that it exists, but I find it hard to acknowledge that there's this us versus them mentality where it's like women against the world. I do think it's harder for women to reach investors. I think it's harder to get the message through. There's probably actually other issues that kind of pop up as well, whether it's family or culture in some countries or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, we've really tried to break those boundaries wherever we can. And I would say actually, just anecdotally, I'd say, we have founders that come from overseas that are women that come over here and they're like, I've never, like, it's easier to be a woman founder in Singapore than it is here, where the president is a woman, half the cabinet's a woman, right? In Asian countries particularly, where they're used to the woman being a little higher in the social order, or whatever you want to call it. I almost wonder, here's the thing I'll probably piss off some people with, I almost wonder if this is just an American thing.
When you look at cross countries, that I think every country has its strengths and weaknesses, but I think Paul brought up a very good point, is often having women in leadership positions, and those role models are critical also for entrepreneurs who are going into these leadership positions and scaling entrepreneurs. So not your part-time or sort of hobby, but women who are actually out there making a difference, because you're used to it. Again, it's something that's acceptable, as opposed to, oh, who is this and what is this and are they capable? So I think that when you have that role model, and so we see that too in our research, that, and we support that, is that percentage of female managers is a good indication of the favorability of the context towards women who are going to have growing businesses, because already there's an acceptance of women in these decision-making positions.
Yeah, and I think that just to add to that, I'll just say that I think it's interesting to see that, and again, forgive me, I'm the guy here, and I'll probably say something retarded and dumb, but the thing is, like, if we think about the role models that I remember thinking about, like, when I remember growing up and thinking about, like, what does my mom read, right? So my mom was an entrepreneur as well, I had grocery stores, all sorts of stuff, and the thing is, like, when you would read the entrepreneurial magazines back then, you would see Oprah on the cover and Martha Stewart on the cover. Like, so my recollection as a child growing up was that the role models for my mother were probably Martha Stewart and Oprah, who had no bearing in the industry, like in the industry that she was in, right, which was retail consumer. And now I wonder, total, idea here. I wonder if we're right on the verge of a change, right? Because now we've got, Marissa Meyer, and we've got women founders that are not only like even at the beginning stages, but we're seeing them at the CEO level now. We're seeing exits now. We're seeing more founders, VCs that are women now. I almost wonder if like the next 5 years are going to be really transformative for the gender. It feels so weird to say, but still, I just wonder if it's almost going to become easier over the next few years.
So I think it would be easier if we embrace it as what you're saying as a gendered, so it's a win-win for men and women together. Because I think when you talk about women stepping into leadership positions or positions of more responsibility and decision-making, you're also assuming that that's going to be accepted at the different levels, within the household and the community, and that's another area that needs a lot of change. And we see that not only in the United States, but abroad. So for example, there's this issue of you see a lot of micro-entrepreneurs, women who are with small businesses, and that's very acceptable, but studies have shown when they reach higher incomes, the norms are different, and suddenly it's harder. So it's not as acceptable to have that business anymore because there's the breadwinner norm, and then what is it? Your husband's not making enough money, and and that's not as acceptable. Or maybe you can have it on the side, but you can't have it as a full-time growing business.
I wouldn't mind being cared for.
Well, see, this is wonderful. So I think it takes both. It takes both sides.
My golf swing is terrible, and it would get so much better. Ben?
It is interesting though, I mean, just to, I guess, go on that, and Paul and I were talking about married couples. I don't know, maybe there are some married couples out there who are starting their own business, and I know we've heard over and over again from investors that they don't like married co-founders, that that's just too much of a risk. From our perspective, and you have to go into it sort of with your eyes wide open and know that it is a risk. It is helpful in our case, for instance, to have one person actually keeping the roof over our head and the other person running the startup. But it is interesting to hear from investors that they don't want to go down that path, even though it would seem like, from their perspective, they would want to ensure that their founders are not going to be homeless people. It would, like, just taking it from that perspective, that their founders are thinking it through, that they're covered, and that they're entering into this business venture knowing that like their basic needs are going to be met and they can focus on this business.
Yeah, I mean, we don't actually worry about. So I won't speak for the fund officially or anything like that, but what I'll say is like, whether they're married or not doesn't really bother us. It's not actually, the way I would actually say it is, I'm not convinced that the risk is any higher or lower on the company's outcome, whether they're married or not. So in other words, like, look, you might have two guys working together, or a guy and a girl that are not married or whatever, but like, is the probability of the founder breakup occurring any higher or lower than a married couple? There's no data, at least on our end, that shows that there is. And so from our perspective, we actually, hey, look, it's not even, sometimes I know that I've had founders that'll come over, particularly, it doesn't matter whether it's the guy or the girl that'll come to me first, but as you're like looking at the thing, you're kind of like, I know that you're like talking a little bit different about that person. What's the relationship there? And then they'll like admit that they're married and like, oh, but that is kind of my co-founder. You're like, dude, just say it. It's fine. It's totally cool. But there is some sort of stigma, and I don't know why. And I bet you if you...
Because of Ashton and Denise.
Yeah, maybe. But I would argue if you pinned these investors to a wall and asked them why, I bet you they would have no good answer.
They would not have a good answer. And I think that, and I want to hit one other subject area, and then we're going to open the floor for Q&A, and it goes along this line of, should a person be married? Can a person be married and have a successful business? The question of partnership. Now, I've been in business for a few years. I'm around entrepreneurs all the time. I probably know a dozen companies where there's business partners, two people, and none of them like each other. None of them. They're on completely different pages in terms of how the business should be run.
Do you have a partner for your business?
I don't have
Oh,
one.
okay, I was gonna say, it's gonna be really awkward when they find out you said that.
Yeah, I'm sitting here talking bad about my business partner. But, so I would like to have each of you ladies just talk about that. You know, did you ever consider taking on a business partner? And how did you handle that particular decision-making process?
I actually started the business with two partners who were male. And it was interesting because, I sat down with them and I said, I am starting an agency. And I would like to invite you in to become a partner. And I was going to give them a reasonable share. And as men, many times.
You can hate on me, it's
I'm
cool.
sorry,
I'll
I gotta
represent
hate the other way, no kidding.
all males. I'll
And
represent.
these are both men whom I deeply respect and had worked with for many years. And it was an interesting dynamic because we had worked together and we had successes together. And I think it was interesting that it was my vision and I was taking the lead, and yet there were two men who were equally as successful as part of my team. And we had to have those discussions early on about, well, who's the boss here? And I made it very clear from the beginning that this would be my agency. And I will be honest, there's a little friction in the beginning, but once we establish those parameters, one of those partners I've since bought out, and he's left, he's an elementary school teacher now. And the other is still with me, and he owns a percentage of the company. And he is brilliant, and it works beautifully because we established the guardrails in the very beginning. And it was not an easy conversation, and it does. I mean, you really look at everything, from money to vision to, who's going to put the most sweat equity in and all of that. Risk, my house was on the line, and I was willing to put my house on the line, and I funded the business. So all those discussions, I think, anybody out there who is thinking of partnership, I would say get a good lawyer. Make sure you have a lawyer representing your interests, not just the interest of the corporation. And just be sure that you have those difficult discussions in advance and that it's all on paper and you have your exit strategy planned out, which we do. And it has been wonderful. I mean, we have not had one issue in terms of, disagreement among partners.
I did start initially with a partner, and we were smart enough after some cajoling to actually start it off with the help of a lawyer. I cannot say enough about how you might say, oh, this person's like my best friend, and oh my God, we're never going to get into fights, and we have the same vision, and oh my God, she's going to totally put in as much work as me. No. It really turns out that is not, your bestie is not the person to start a business with, as it turns out, because it only leads to grief. I think you start off, in my opinion, you don't find somebody who's your Xerox copy. You don't go, oh my God, we've both so much energy, we're going to get so much done. You want to find somebody that will complement you and that can bring you down to earth if you're the one up in the sky, and if you're the one who's like super organized and gets things done, then maybe someone who's a little more creative and imaginative and out there floating in outer space coming up with more interesting ideas. That might be an interesting partnership. But the best thing we did was start off at a lawyer's office, even though it felt so uncomfortable. Like, looking at the words that were written on the paper, they're like, if you are, this happens, then this happens. If, one of you dies, your husband gets, I mean, it's very uncomfortable, but I think extraordinarily necessary.
I love when legal documents say whereas. When sections are whereas, like, who uses that in real life?
No one.
It's like whereas, and you're like, what are we talking about exactly?
Now you get to the lawyers, that you need a lawyer.
That's why they're billing.
It's like a whole thing.
Okay. Well, let's open the floor for questions. We've talked a lot up here. I know that many of you have questions.
Heckling is allowed, by the way. Seriously. Okay, heckling me is allowed. You can't heckle them, but heckle the dude.
Okay, dude. I'm gonna ask you as a female serial entrepreneur. You let me have.
Wait,
the
me?
mic.
Oh.
Yeah, you, man.
Shit.
When do you think is the right time? What advice would you share is the right time to take venture capital when building a business?
Right. Okay. So I think it's not gender specific. I think the only time you should ever take anybody's money, whether it's a VC or angel, is to grow the business. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions and misunderstandings about outside capital is that, hey, if I have an idea, I'll go find an investor. A, nobody's investing in ideas anymore. And if you are and you're an investor investing in ideas, you're an idiot. Don't do it. Seriously, there's too many good things out there to invest in. But B, like knowing how hard it is, like some of the stuff Dave said too, when you take somebody's money, you just implicitly and, believe it or not, explicitly agree to sell your company at some point. Right? So do not give me equity in your company unless you plan to use the money to grow. Otherwise, you got the short end of the stick.
And be replaced or have the company sold if you're urging to your largest customer.
That's right. I think, like that's one of the issues people don't really talk about very often, and jury's out as to like how often it really happens. But founders can be replaced. It does happen.
I have a question for Brooke, and then one quick one for Ruta as well. Brooke, you talked about your initial definition of success as being the continual upward trajectory, and I just wondered whether your definition has in fact changed, because you didn't really answer that part of the question. I was intrigued by that.
Did you notice that?
I did notice that. And Ruta, I just had a question about the incentive structure that you mentioned and how important that was, and if you could say a few more words about that, and also the policy structures that need to be in place that you've seen from your research that would be really conducive to helping women.
Well, I guess it would be sugarcoating the whole experience to say that all you have to do is X, Y, and Z and your startup will succeed. Most startups are going to fail. And I guess, in watching the Washington Post get bought this week and reading a lot about Jeff Bezos, my advice to people, or my warning, is you have to be willing to look like a fool for a long period of time, and Jeff Bezos was and sometimes is, and be willing to be really poor for a long period, indefinite period of time. And you have to really examine your tolerance for risk personally, financial, emotionally, because all of a sudden, and I came from the world of TV where we had Nielsen ratings, and you look at the numbers and see how many viewers you had the night before, and when you're in this startup world, your emotions are sort of like that too. You're only as good as the last customer, and if the last customer you had was really happy, then you're great, and everything's going just like you planned it. If the last customer is really unhappy with you, then the whole business is collapsing, and what are you going to do with everything you've invested in it? So emotionally, it's a real roller coaster. So my definition of a success early on, and that continued growth, it hasn't worked out that way the whole time for the last year and a half. But my husband and I both are we look at the horizon of it, and emotionally we are, we've prepared ourselves for the possibility that it wouldn't always feel like you're, going up the roller coaster and it's really suspenseful and fun. There were going to be times that you feel like you're backsliding a little bit, and do you have what it takes to endure that? And I would be lying to you if I told you that, you should prepare for the ride, the most fun you've ever had. In some ways it really is a ride, but it's everything that entails. So we still feel like, I guess my definition of success is continued growth, but it's averaged now over a long period of time. So that doesn't mean that from day to day I always feel like I'm growing. It means that from year to year I feel like I'm growing. So I'm revising my view of success, and now I'm adding in that indexing for over time.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I think it's a very important one. It's about incentives, especially when we're talking about female entrepreneurs. Because the classic incentives, screaming to the research, William Baumol identified that entrepreneurs are motivated by power, prestige, and profit. 3 Ps. But it's broader than that. We see a lot of social entrepreneurs that are also motivated by impact, helping others. But I think for women, sometimes it's a double bind, and that's what policies can address and social norms need to address, because women are also often judged on a broader point of view. So when they go into business, their incentive of just profit, power, prestige, having an impact, but then how are they being judged by those around them? And that's another, so that also informs their incentives. Are they being criticized because they're not spending enough time with their children, or they're not doing enough in their community, or these other, and I think another one that holds women back is the perfection. This incentive of everything has to be perfect, and it's not going to be perfect in a business. And so not giving yourself slack and often pulling back before, oh God, I don't want anyone to point out my mistakes. I already know my mistakes, so I'm just going to pull back, and I'm not even going to try. So I think those are really important questions to address on a societal level, but also on an individual level. And then in terms of policies, this is a shout out to all governments, US included, is data. We do not know what we're talking about if we don't have the data to back it up. Data is powerful. It provides us the tools so that we can put in the right policies and programs in place. So, thank you.
I just wanted to punctuate a point that you said that resonated with me, and to be honest, I never thought about being a female entrepreneur. I'm just an entrepreneur. I just wanted to start my own business. But I have to say, I have been surprised at how many people have asked me this question. And I'm wondering if many of you women have probably heard this. You're a mother. We know you have 2 children. How do you do it? I couldn't do that if I were you. And it is this really interesting phenomenon that occurs. My husband, who has a much bigger job than I do, he's never once been asked that question. And I find that a really interesting dynamic just in, being a woman in business. That's something that I'll bet you've never been asked that question.
I've never been asked that. But,
Right.
but okay, finish the point. I want to add
No,
something.
that's but even if you had kids, you wouldn't have been asked that question.
And Beth, I just want to add, the issue is also, it doesn't help because already as a mother, you've got the guilt. Every mother has the guilt of not being good enough. And so there you go, being asked, how are you balancing it? So
Without a doubt, women do face a unique set of circumstances. If we are going to have children, many of us, I think on the panel do, not all of us have children, as far as I know, men cannot carry children. Okay, we're working on it, but so I think that there are some inherent issues that we have to face, and I think that one of the things that when I was working for a man, I think that women like us are going to change. I think you're right that we are having the right conversations. I wholeheartedly agree with the need for data, but just a personal anecdote. I worked for a man who was incredibly old school, and I feel like I made a difference in changing him. And one of the things that happened when I had my children, and I was faced with that mommy guilt, and I went to him and said, look, if you want to keep me, I've got an idea. Put a nursery in the office for me. And you know what he did? We had 11 babies graduate from that nursery. Some men brought their babies to work as well as women. And it's that kind of thing that's going to make change. And women like us have to drive that change. So, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. The data is going to drive the conversation at the policy level. And you need a VC funder for that.
Maybe.
I would
maybe, yeah. I would just add that, I think, so this is going to be a totally anecdotal comment, but one of the things that we hear, we have these offices in Mexico and New York and Mountain View, and all of our companies sit together. And there's guys, there's girls. It's a pretty interesting mix. But what's interesting is, what I find interesting anyways, is that there is this constant struggle. And it's not really talked about very often. It doesn't matter whether you're a guy or girl in our portfolio. But one of the conversations that always comes up is there a balance? How do you balance ambition versus family? Or ambition versus personal lives? And I hear guys, and I'm not trying to make the case for guys, I'm just simply saying that, like, you know, it's interesting because both sides face it, but it's experienced in different ways.
Yes.
So you brought up the example of children. Certainly guys would never be asked that question. I think, you know, one of the anecdotal comments I'll hear on the other side is the guy will say, well, you know, my wife or my girlfriend's not happy that I'm not home enough. And maybe I should take the 9 to 5. And so it's very interesting. But again, I'm not making a case for guys. I'm just simply saying that struggle between ambition and balance is a really interesting one. And personally, I haven't found it.
It's a generational issue too. The millennials are driving that conversation, and that's good. They're going to make positive change.
I definitely feel the desire to talk about this topic, but I want to take more questions. We have one right back here in the back.
First comment, Paul, anything that starts with an F-bomb is okay in my book. And
Fuck yeah.
so it's been an excellent conversation. My question's actually for Ruta, but it's inspired by Paul. I do wonder if there's not some correlation to the idea or idea that it's an American problem. And my shocking example is that I remember during the political seasons, there's always great conversation, and I pretty specifically started asking around, would you be voting for a woman president, regardless of, party or whatever. Overwhelmingly shocked at the number of women that said, no, I would not vote for a woman. And I do think that is in our society. So I'm curious if in your analysis of your 17 countries, is there a correlation to the high potential entrepreneurs and women in government? Was that part of your study at all? Do you have any data on that?
We don't have women in government per se, but we have women managers, legislators, and so more in the decision making. So that's a similar proxy, and there is a correlation, strong correlation between the two. But I would disagree that this is an American problem. The interesting thing in the U.S., and this is a recent study, is that in the U.S. you have a high percentage of female managers, so 43% of managers in the United States. It's higher than, let's say, in the Scandinavian countries that have much more sort of these family-friendly policies and options than you think, where they really have a push for that. And what they noticed is there you have more opportunities for flexible jobs, where you can work part-time and you can. But the issue, or what they found, is that it's mainly women who choose that. And so, but what happens is when you choose that track, the likelihood that you'll become a manager, rise up, the ladder is greatly reduced, because you're just not there, enough to rise. So the paradox is, in the U.S. we don't have these policies, and so we have all these female managers because they were there and they showed their skills and they moved up. But so is the policy the problem? That's the question. The family friendly? It's not. It's social norms, obviously, because the men are not choosing those. And why aren't they choosing them? And I think that's a really important discussion to be having, of that we need to see more of a balance of taking on these responsibilities and men being allowed to do that. Because I think that's another big part of this puzzle.
We have another question back here.
So, quick question for the entrepreneurs and also Paul as an investor. You generally have service-based companies as opposed to product-based, but I think to the extent that it started with an idea, the question is probably still relevant. How soon after you had the idea did you protect the idea? What steps did you take to protect the idea, and what would you recommend to people, particularly in the case of a product, how soon you would do that if it's easily replicable? And same question, Paul, for portfolio companies that had this issue. A second question for Paul, you said none of your portfolio companies have business plans. What kind of diligence does your fund use in lieu of a business plan? So that's a secondary question for you.
Just guess. Okay, who's up?
I think initially, whenever you have an idea, you sort of want to rush out and buy that website name. Oh my God, gotagreatidea.com. Whatever it is. I think that's one way of protecting it, but understanding that certain things can be trademarked and copyrighted, and I have had different product ideas and have gone through the legal stuff. It's expensive.
but depending upon what you want to do, it may or may not be worth it.
Yeah, and then, obviously you're operating on sort of a shoestring, and so to go through the patent filings, it all depends on what it is that you're trying to get to market. I mean, just getting the domain name, that's the first step, and getting the trademark for what you're doing. Whether you have something that's potentially patentable is something that obviously is a legal exercise, and it requires $5,000 or $10,000 to get that job done. I mean, we did the preliminary work on just what was necessary within 6 months. There is always the chance, even if you are service-based and you have a website like ours, that a camp twice as easy could come along. And so our goal, that's why you have to be fast. Is why you have to be fast and getting it to market and getting that recognition and serving customers and building up your reputation as quickly as possible with technology, because it happens quickly.
Amy just reminded me of a story. I was so the founder. There's a local company here called Living Social, and the founder's name is Aaron Battalion, or one of the founders is Aaron Battalion. And I was in a bar with him in San Francisco. We were both speaking at an event the next morning, and his first baby was due. And this is probably 18 months ago now, but we're sitting in this bar. We're like 7 bourbons in, which is like 6 too many. And so he goes like, I was like, hey, how's the baby coming along? When's it due? And he's like, oh man, it's coming soon. What the fuck should I name my baby? And so like as I'm sitting there, the guy's got his laptop, so he buys the domain, whatthefouldshouldinameMyBaby.com. And what it does, I think it might still be live. What it does, he did not use a site to name his baby, but when you go to the website and you just reload it, it just pops a random name. And like, I remember within a few days, people actually used it. I don't know if they named their babies, but it was really funny. And so the funny thing about that guy is that everywhere you go, he's buying domains on his phone. If he hears an idea, he'll probably bought Camp twice as easy already. I don't know what he does with them. Okay, so there were 2 questions. One was about patent, and the other was about diligence. Okay, so here's the thing. So on the patent side, I don't like them as an investor. Go use somebody else's money later on to go get it patented. Here's the way I would actually say it. I have had a lot of companies fail, but I have never had any company in my portfolio ever fail because of anything other than what I call creative suicide. When you file for a patent too early, the only person that got rich is the attorney. Sorry to the attorneys, by the way. You guys are great people. But seriously, like, see, here's the thing. 5 years ago, I would have given you a different answer. 5 years ago, I would have said to you, you should probably maybe even file a provisional. You should probably worry about it. But like, here's the problem today. The problem today is there's probably like, how many competitors do you think you have now?
Nobody, well, one.
Okay, there's got to be more though.
There are people who are addressing it in a slightly different way.
Right, but the difference is that it's not the brand. Tell me if I'm wrong. It's not the brand that will save you ultimately. It's your traction. Like, I believe that traction is the intellectual property of today. Right? The reason why you can't beat Facebook is because 700 million people use it every day. It's overwhelming, right? And when you think about like your business, I bet you're using like search engine optimization and things like that. The more time that you have out on the web winning, the harder it is for somebody to get there. So again, just my opinion, I would just say unless you're doing something truly novel, like if you're doing something in medicine or you've got some real invention, all bets are off. You should probably go talk to an attorney. But if you're talking about an online business, just spend all your time on distribution and figuring out how to get people to use your product.
But for every pulsing, there's an investor who says, I'm not interested unless you have a provisional patent.
I want to kill those people. Just send me their names. I will put them out of business, seriously. Actually, I will tell you, one of the things I tell everybody I know is the thing I worry about is that personally, the thing I worry about is not failure. The thing I worry about is that I worry that I might become the very people I'm trying to destroy. And that person, the one you just described, is the one that I fear. But anyway, so the second part to your second question was about diligence. So here's the thing. When a founder comes in the early days, so let me say it, I'll just say it more aggressively. For those of you that are thinking about starting a business or already running a business, don't listen to anything we say because it's not applicable to you. The only takeaways you should have, fight me on this, guys, heckle me, but I think the fact is, the only thing you should take away from this panel is that there is hope. the techniques you use to get there, the failures you face, they are truly unique. Nothing that we have. If we had a silver bullet, A, we probably wouldn't share it with you. B, we'd have more money than God. And C, we wouldn't share it with you. Right? You guys wouldn't share it. If it's working, you're not going to share it. But
I don't know. I would say
she's so
I would
nice.
say surround yourself with people who are willing. I mean, surround yourself with advisors. I think that's, and I personally in my industry, I spent a lot of time meeting with other CEOs of ad agencies when I started mine. And they do, many of them, Dan Wyden and Kennedy. I mean, this guy, Nike, just do it, right? I mean, he, and the founder of Martin Agency in Richmond, one of the top agencies in the country, really spent an entire day with me and shared, the startup woes. He started that agency. So I did have the benefit of people who were willing to share with me, and I personally would help someone else start their business and share with them.
So I'll read between the lines there on that one, though, real quick, and tell me if I'm wrong. I think the thing is, though, is that be careful of advisors. When you have any modicum of success, every joker with a little bit of room between their ears is going to say they're an advisor.
Seek out the ones you admire for good reason.
Don't admire them. They did something.
Right.
Doers attract doers, and I believe that the best thing you can do if you want to be a good entrepreneur is curate the hell out of your network. You are the average of the 6 most successful people around you. That's it. Right? So what I hear when you said that story is I don't disagree with it. What I hear is you had 5 or 6 people that clearly had done something. And that's really powerful, right? And see, you guys, believe it or not, it is easier for you to start a business than it was for me years ago, for you guys even more recently. 15 years ago, there was nothing on the internet about this. When I saw my first term sheet, I was like, what are we talking about here? What is evaluation? It wasn't in the encyclopedia. There were no websites for this, right? And my only hope was to try to go find other entrepreneurs and see, hey, did you raise money? Does this look real? That's all we had, right? Today, you can Google it. You can go on AngelList and see the average valuation of any company you want based on school, location, gender. You can do anything you want, right? You have information. Your biggest barrier is you, right? So if I can give you anyway, I'm just going to be a pundit for a second. Just go do stuff.
Go ahead. One last statement. We're going to get ready to wrap it up and do parting wisdom. But what were you going to?
I have nothing to say. I was just rambling.
Okay. All right. So we need to wrap it up. We're kind of running out of time here. One thing I want to do is have each person give one last statement in terms of parting wisdom for our group. And then if you have additional questions, you have opportunity to network with everyone after we break. All right. So one last thought. One last piece of advice.
I think the last piece of advice that I would give would be that the true gift that any entrepreneur, in my mind, could be given, not that I would necessarily have the answer, is resiliency, which is not something I think is given out that easily to people, is that the idea of seeing a stack of regulatory paperwork from Medicare services should not be considered to be so onerous as to not do it. A lot of people turn away when it seems hard. I mean, I think that there's certain personality types that see things that are hard and go, never mind. So resiliency and pursuit of that one thing that you want, and then to be resilient when you get pushed down in other directions. You get over the original hump, you're sort of an ideas person and you want to keep going, but it seems too hard. Don't let it seem too hard. Take a break, do some retail therapy, get a new pair of shoes, whatever it is, and go back to it and with a new spirited effort. And to not allow that one failure to change the way that you move forward. And a lot of people will say no, and the more people that say no, you should say yes back. Thank you.
Believe in yourself.
I guess my advice would be that obviously, those of you who are thinking about starting your own businesses, you have an idea, and maybe you're wondering if you should really go for it. And I think the real test, and there's no easy answer to it, obviously, is would you just so regret not having pursued it? Could you live with not doing it? And if you could live with not doing it, then maybe it's not that meaningful to you. Maybe you don't have a driving passion. But if you really look at yourself in the mirror and say, I can't not do this, then you have to find a way to do it. I mean, you have one life, so you got to pursue it if you have that great idea. And that kind of passion is going to be what gets you through the rough times, because there will be those. And it's what's going to sort of get you to whatever definition of success that you have.
So I would tag on to what's already been said and say really not be afraid of that public belly flop, because that's often holding a lot of people back from following their dreams, that fear of doing something publicly that's just going to be so embarrassing, shameful, I'm not going to be able to survive it. Is often that fear is greater than the act itself. You realize that it's really, you're the biggest critic. No one else is actually watching you that much. No one really cares. But you're making it bigger than it actually is. And so, follow that dream. And then I have just a request, and that is, if you are a female entrepreneur, it's really, if you can take that on board, wear the label female entrepreneur with embrace it, and be a role model for others to follow in your steps, because until we reach that tipping point, it's still sort of seen as sort of the other, not the norm. Help us move that into the norm.
So I would, so an observation and then the advice. I would say, so my parents were immigrants from India, and one of the things that I felt a lot growing up, and I think some of you, I'll just also watch whether you nod or not, is that for a long time, experience was directly correlated with age. So in other words, like in India, for example, you just don't talk back to an elder professionally or personally. Now, maybe there's no point to talk back to them ever personally, you should never do that, but professionally, you'd never do it either. And now, what we've actually seen, at least at the 500 portfolio level, is that experience is really defined by the number of iterations, right? So the real question, so this is now to the advice. My real advice to you is, just go do stuff. Your likelihood of success is just as good as anybody else's, right? The bad news is, the odds are against you. But they're no worse, I think, than if you were to go start like an ice cream store, or a car dealership, or a franchise, or an internet company. They're no worse. So the default state of your company's failure, the only person who can turn it around is you. And it's not going to come through some flash of genius. It's going to come by trying a lot of stuff faster than anybody else and waiting to see what will stick. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you very much for coming out again. Thank the panelists. There's two things we're trying to do at VentureCamp: have insightful conversations that you can learn something with, as well as get a lot of hope. And also to start creating stronger networks here in the Arlington, DC metro region. So, as Paul said, network like crazy. One thing that we did tonight was there's 6 founders outside as well to network with. And then also just want to remind you all, next week, on the 14th, we have immigration and entrepreneurship coming up for VentureCamp. Great panel. And it's not just immigrants, it's kids of immigrants. Very impactful. I think it's 40% of high-tech startups. They are people. And then the 21st is wearable computing. So Google Glass, Fitbit, all those kinds of technology. We're going to have people here with some technology you can check out in the interactive portion. So thank you again for coming, and make sure you sign up for the next 2 sessions.